Gospel of Luke, chapter 13. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." And when he had laid hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which to work. Come on those days and you will be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from the bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said all this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. I want to thank Reverend Dwight Bailey as worship leader last week, and Reverend Ellie Bunches as our preacher last week, to be involved in leadership. "How was your vacation?" they said, and I say it was about 2 days away from me not coming back. We had a good experience. And it's good to be back with you. It's good to be in Kings Highway at this really special time. We had 50-some people came out to an affirmative inquiry session as part of the Epiphany Project, and we really don't know what that was going to be like, but we had a good turnout and a discussion and a beginning of a process to try to recapture the vision of what is the ministry of Kings Highway. And Clint Snell is presently working on helping with the next step of that. And I've been busy trying to breathe some life into our youth programming, and I so much appreciate all of you who have said yes, I will help with that. I grew up in a small town on Route 66. Because we were on a highway, a few things were open on Sunday. Back in those years, there were pretty strict, what was called blue laws, which had to do with what could and could not be sold on a Sunday. You could sell food and you could sell gasoline, but you couldn't sell hardware and a whole list of things. And so everything other than a couple of restaurants and a couple of filling stations was closed on Sunday. It was also the attitude of the people in my community, especially my father, that work was not going to be done on Sunday. He didn't think much of anybody who didn't get around to mowing their yard before Sunday. And it was kind of generally quiet. Sunday was a day that we kind of generally in this community went to church, or some people played golf or went fishing, but generally it was a quiet day, and no one would think about scheduling some kind of an event on Sunday afternoon, much less a sporting event. So it was a different time. And I can understand a little bit how the leader of the Sabbath felt when Jesus comes in as an outsider and speaks and says things that I'm sure that were rather radical for those folks, and then has the audacity to do work in the form of healing of a woman It was a holy day in a holy place. Where's your sense of decorum, Jesus? This story is unique to Luke. And it's about a woman, which is, as you know, a common theme in the work of the Gospel of Luke. He wrote about a lot of women. And Jesus responded to the leader of the Sabbath, saying, you know, what has happened has been a great kindness. You think your day is sacred and your place is sacred, but this woman's life is sacred. She was bent over, it says, and had been for so many years. It is an unpleasant truth that there is a great bit of violence against women that continues to our present day, where physically and psychologically women are beaten down so they cannot stand. Cultural forces ask women to bend to someone else's idea of beauty. Now, for those of you who might be here as a mixed-sex couple, who took the longest to get ready today? Standards that put extra burdens on women. A friend asked if I was going to be preaching today, yesterday, and I said, I don't know, maybe I'll just talk, or maybe I'll go to meddling. Women of the New Testament were definitely, not entirely, but generally second-class citizens. It was a time of patriarchy. That is, the men were in charge. And women didn't have very many rights. They couldn't inherit anything. They couldn't sign contracts. Most of them were totally responsible for the men in the family, for their livelihood. Well, I'm glad we're all past that, so now that women in the workplace can make 79 cents for every dollar that a man makes in the U.S. Women's earnings tend to peak at age 40, whereas men continue to grow and peak at age 49. Some of you would remember a premier dancing couple named Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. They were a lovely couple, and both of them actors, and performed in many popular movies in the 30s and 40s. Ancient history, I know, but it was said about Ginger Rogers, she did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels. Such is the role of women in the New Testament and continues in our society today. This woman was anonymous. She was crippled and weighted down and hurting. I suppose a number of women have little problem identifying with this daughter of Moses. A writer who happens to be a nun named Marian Therese Winter writes, "Surely you meant when you lifted her up long ago to your praise, compassionate one, not one woman only, but all women bent by unbending ways." Of the many healing stories in the Gospel of Luke, this one's a little different. It's in the synagogue. A spirit that crippled her 18 years. What some versions translate a spirit of infirmity. Not an infirmity as it well would be, but a spirit of infirmity, which sounds kind of like an attitude. Maybe what this woman faced was not so much a physical condition as it was a spiritual condition or a psychological condition. Could a burdened mind, a burdened spirit result in a bent back? Physical symptoms can be caused by mental or spiritual distress. Fainting, seizures, paralysis, blindness, hearing loss, loss of speech, muscle weakness, difficulty swallowing. All of these can be caused by stress and other things that you're probably aware of people that are suffering from PTSD. We have phrases in our vocabulary: paralyzed by fear, died of a broken heart, worried himself sick, spirit of infirmity, a spiritual problem that was making her sick. I hope you looked at the bulletin cover today. This picture of a young woman with some huge burden on her back with names on it of things: debt, job, family, bids, kids, finances, grief. Some are hard to read. And there's spaces on there for you to, at least mentally, write a few more on there. I was so happy to see this when I got back from my trip. Christy Duggan, our wonderful secretary, sees the scripture for the week and then picks the cover for the bulletin, and she does a fabulous job at that. And by the way, Ellie gives the children's sermon each week, and she knows the scripture that is going to be the subject of the day, and we don't hardly ever talk about the children's sermon, but she ties it all so well into what is going on. And Craig works to pick songs that tie into the theme of the day so that there is some sense of unity of what we do in our chaos on Sunday morning. There is no way to know what happened 18 years before the encounter with Jesus. Had this woman done something that caused her such terrible guilt that she could no longer look into the eyes of those around her? Or perhaps more likely, 18 years earlier, someone had done something to her that caused her to take on a shame that she could not look anyone in the eye. That is not hard to imagine. Not in her time, and not in ours. Maybe at first she lowered her eyes to avoid eye contact, but eventually she began to lower her head until 18 years later she was hobbling around town using a walking stick to support her bent over body. She would have a hard time looking at people, or as Jim Somerville says, she'd be looking at them straight in the knees, which for her might have been easier than looking them in the eyes. And it says Jesus sees a woman. He sees her. Do you know the joy of being seen? Of somebody really noticing you and paying attention to you? I was doing some work on material for the Cairo youth group, and there was a phrase in there that really caught my attention that said that junior high kids will focus their attention on the oldest person in the room that pays attention to them and takes them seriously. We give our attention to the people that take us seriously, and it said Jesus sees her. And because she was bent over and shorter than everybody else, it would have been easier to overlook her. But Jesus saw what was within her. I suppose if Jesus were the guest preacher today, he would look out and see what the burdens are that you are carrying with you this morning. And I think his heart would be full of a joy to reach out and help you lift, to put down, to discard, to rise. Spirits have been crippled by those things we have done or the things that we have had done to us. And don't you think he could see? So Jesus calls that woman to him and takes the initiative, and she responds and takes her part in the process of healing. If any of us are wanting to be able to find healing, we're going to have to do the same. Someone says to us, "Come, be healed, be saved, be forgiven." And we're going to have to participate in that. It's not magic. It's cooperation. Jesus speaks to her and says, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Before laying a hand on her, he assures her of her freedom. Is that what's holding you down? You feel you don't have the freedom to move on. Woman, whatever shame or guilt has kept you roped down and doubled, you are free. There was a controversy in the synagogue. How can you dare do work, this work of healing on the Sabbath? And Jesus said, "Look, you who have animals, you took your ox, your donkey, and you led it to water today. Shouldn't this woman who had been tied up in her infirmity for 18 years be untied on this day of all days? Wouldn't it be a godly thing not to have to wait a minute longer to find healing? To be released from this bondage?" In 1678, an Englishman by the name of John Bunyan published an allegory called Pilgrim's Progress. It had a lot to do with the religious persecution of his time. It is the first English novel, and it's a story about a man named Christian in his journey from the world to the celestial city representing heaven. It's kind of a long book, but it has been translated in 200 languages, and it has never been out of print. It is indeed, after the Bible, one of the most widely sold books in history. In the early stages of this book, this man, Christian, starts on his journey from his city. He's wearing ragged clothes, and he has a huge burden on his back. It's meant to represent his sin. And it weighs him down and bends him over. And for the first part of the book, he staggers along under the weight of this enormous load. But at last he reaches a place where a cross has been erected. And one of the most wonderful pictures in that wonderful book is that Christian is standing at the foot of the cross, and the heavy load falls from his back. And it vanishes into this bottomless pit behind him. The straps that were holding it to his shoulders have been cut through cleanly. And for the first time in this story, he is able to stand up straight. You get the picture. Christian, this is now Lori, is set free at the foot of the cross. That seems like maybe an old-fashioned idea from an old-fashioned book written hundreds of years ago. But what if it's true? What if Jesus still has the power to release us from the things that burden us, that bend us over? What if he's calling you right now, inviting you to come? And what if all he's waiting for is you? Amen.